Okay, I believe it's working. All right, we are officially live. So welcome to all of our students, teachers, and parents and families from all over the world. We have got you live on YouTube. We've got you on Facebook. And of course, we've got an audience here in the Zoom call as well. And I'm very excited to tell you that our special guest today is Herb Baker. And Herb is someone that I got to connect with through another space group that I work with on Facebook called the Space Hipsters. But then I interacted with Herb through the Major Tim, because you are a patron for
Yes.
Major Tim as well. And of course, the Major Tim team send their regards, Amelia and her ambassadors. And I believe you were with them just recently for the
Yes.
selection of the new
Yes.
ambassadors.
I was one of the judges. Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. And, you know, one thing that I know about space is that astronauts have got some fascinating stories. Scientists have got some fascinating stories, but a lot of people don't know this. But there are some people who work behind the scenes and they have got stories that would blow your mind. So we're going to start off with asking Herb, I know a little birdie on my shoulder tells me that you didn't start out being a space enthusiast, but you might have had the genes or some sort of connection to space. And the way you got into NASA wasn't because you were a scientist or an engineer, but rather working with TV. So maybe can you tell us a little bit about how that all started?
Oh, okay. Well, yes. So it really goes back to the mid 60s or even early 60s. I was living in a little town called, and now I've moved away and lived in Virginia and Arizona and Florida. I've come back to actually the same little town. And it's just a few miles from where they ended up building what was then called the Manned Spacecraft Center. Today, it's the Johnson Space Center. And so I was 12 years old when they opened the Manned Spacecraft Center. And so that's where all the astronauts lived and worked. And so all of a sudden in 1964, when I'm 12 years old in middle school, my classmates or the kids of the astronauts that were my age. And so for example, I played on the 7th grade football team with the sons of Scott Carpenter and Frank Borman. And we're still, friends today. So anyway, from the time I was in middle school and the whole, NASA astronauts and NASA community grew up and moved in just, within a few miles of where I lived, I was obviously, connected to NASA and NASA families. And so, but even then, I was never, science wasn't my strong subject. I was much better at well, of course, math is considered part of STEM, but not the real hard math, just, and so it never occurred to me, as much as I enjoyed being around NASA and NASA families and certainly, watching what was going on with the early Apollo missions, it never occurred to me that I might one day have a career with NASA, because again, I when I went to college, I was a business major, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, I think. So as you mentioned, TV, it was the summer of 1969, July 1969, and the Apollo 11 mission was coming up. And back then, obviously, worldwide TV coverage. And so the way the US TV networks covered those NASA missions was they would send crews down from New York City, which is where all three of their headquarters were located, and set up mobile homes for studios on site there at the Manned Spacecraft Center. And so they have a camera and a backdrop and a desk. And so they would bring astronauts and flight directors and other significant NASA employees in and interview them. And so they hired me as a gopher, most of you maybe know what that means. Go for this, go for that. Just whatever they needed done, I would do. But my main job was twice a day, I would drive to the Houston Intercontinental Airport to take that film that they had filmed the interviews with to the airport to have it flown to New York, because this was before, 1969, there was no such thing as videotape or the internet. And so if you filmed an interview in Houston, you had to physically move that film from Houston to New York. And so again, twice a day, I would make that 100-mile round trip to drop film off to have it sent to New York so they could broadcast it on television. And so I, met several of the moonwalkers, and Alan Shepard and Pete Conrad and a few others, just being 17. So I'll tell you one quick story. My favorite story from those early days of working for the TV networks covering the Apollo missions was Apollo 12, November 1969. And so again, I mentioned having to carry the film to the airport for the broadcast on the TV networks, but every once in a while there was a local human interest story where they just broadcasted on a local Houston station. So that film didn't have to be taken to New York; it could just be taken to the local Houston station. So when Apollo 12 was due to splash down in the South Pacific in November 1969 at the end of their mission, they wanted film of Pete Conrad's family. Pete was the commander of Apollo 12 and the third guy to walk on the moon. They wanted film of his family sitting in his living room watching on their TV as the capsule splashed down into the South Pacific. So they sent me and a cameraman to Pete Conrad's house, and I'm in Pete Conrad's living room with the cameraman. I wasn't sprawled out on the couch. I was standing over in the corner, but I was in his living room with his family watching on their TV as Apollo 12 splashed down in the ocean. And wow. I still remember this like it was yesterday. It was over 50 years ago. When the filming was done, the cameraman and I walked into the dining room, and he put the camera in a dark bag to take the film out and put it in a canister so it wasn't exposed to light. He handed the film to me, and I got in my car and drove back to across the street from the Manned Spacecraft Center, which was just a few miles away. There was a helicopter waiting for me. The local Houston TV station was so anxious to get that film in time, because it was like 3 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon, to get it in time to show on the 6 o'clock news, that they didn't want to risk, me being delayed or the time it would take to drive there. They hired a helicopter to fly me from the Manned Spacecraft Center to their TV station downtown. And, I'd never been in a helicopter before. I still remember getting in, and it's this little, all glass. And I remember this was 1969, the pilot telling me, yeah, I just got back from flying missions in Vietnam. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there's not going to be anybody shooting at us, here in Houston, I think, so I should be okay. But the funny thing about that is, again, I think the adrenaline, again, I remember all of that like it was yesterday. And remember getting out of the helicopter, running into the building. There was a desk over on the right side of the building, and there was a woman standing there. She was waiting for me. She knew I was coming. And I handed her the film, and I don't remember anything after that. It's like the adrenaline just drained out. I don't even remember the helicopter ride home, but again, I could tell you second by second what happened before that. That was just such an incredible event for me.
But that is so real. That, I mean, you were so young, and there you are sitting in his family home while he's about to launch to the moon. And of course,
they were landing. Actually, they were
landing. They were landing.
Yeah.
Sorry. And then, of course, you start to think, wow, I mean, this is quite exciting. Maybe my responsibilities are going to grow, because they are flying me first class in a chopper every now and again. You worked with quite a few of the Apollo missions. And yes, from what I can understand, once Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon, the desire to watch all of that on TV slowly started to diminish. No one was really interested in the moon landings anymore. Is that something that you picked up?
Well, yeah, I would say that's true to an extent. Certainly the first one was huge news, and the second one, actually, Apollo 12, wasn't nearly as historic. The interesting part of the Apollo 12 mission was the launch. They got hit by lightning as they were leaving the launch pad, but they recovered from that. And then Apollo 13, so I covered Apollo 11, 12, 13. I was at the University of Texas for 14 in college, and then I came back and covered Apollo 15 and a couple of the Skylab missions. But yeah, it's similar to the Space Shuttle missions. 15 years later, as more and more missions happen successfully, people just stopped watching. It became kind of routine, and then of course there were a few accidents that happened after that, so it wasn't quite as routine as it seemed. But yeah, so I'll finish my story now about how I got started at NASA. So again, I mentioned I continued to work those Apollo missions, and they were just like 2 or 3 week time spans, and then so they were just temporary kind of jobs. But when I went away to college, I was a business major. It had never occurred to me that I might have a career at professional career at NASA, because again, I was majoring in business, and I just assumed, even having grown up with families whose parents worked there, that you had to be a scientist, engineer, astronaut, or a doctor. But of course, as it turns out, and it's the same today, about 1/3 of the NASA employees are business, finance, human resources, and today computer support, social media. So there's a good 35% or so of the NASA workforce that has nothing to do with, other than working with the scientists and engineers and astronauts and doctors. And so if you want, I'll tell you the quick story of how I got my job there. So helping to pay my way through college, I had a part-time job at the Internal Revenue Service, which the headquarters for 5 states was in Austin, Texas, where just a few miles from where I was going to school. So it was a very convenient place to work part-time while I was in school. Well, and so just like NASA, the Internal Revenue Service, of course, is a U.S. government organization. And so the way you got jobs with the U.S. government back in the mid 70s was you took a test, and they called them civil service exams. And so again, I'm majoring in business. I'm getting close to graduating. I have no real job lined up yet, or I figure it's not going to be hard to find a job, in the business world with a degree from University of Texas. But someone, I remember while I was working at the IRS, that some of the folks working there started talking about this test, because it's how you got promoted to professional and administrative jobs. They call it the Professional Administrative Career Exam, PACE. And so, but they were talking about how hard it was, and there were they gave you 6 different scores in 6 different categories, so that, depending on what your best skill or knowledge or capability was, if you did well on the test, they would know what job you were best suited for. And so they said, yeah, sometimes if you get below a 70 out of 100, they just don't give you a score. I guess they don't want to embarrass you. So, so I took the test and indicated on there in my application what cities with U.S. government agencies in it you would be interested in working. And of course I put Houston, not even thinking at the time that, well, NASA is one of those Houston government agencies. And I did so well on the test that when I got my results, I thought they had made a mistake and given me someone else's scores. out of 600, I got 596. So obviously what happened when the scores went to the government agencies, NASA got my scores, and they contacted me and said, hey, would you be interested in coming down and interviewing for a job in our business office? And I was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? How about tomorrow? And so anyway, I came down as soon as possible. The one last interesting part about all of this is that the guy who interviewed me was the father of a good friend in high school. And so I don't know if that helped or not, but it certainly didn't hurt. And so then 42 years later, I finally retired and decided to give somebody else a chance to have that wonderful opportunity.
But now what is so funny is that a lot of people run towards NASA and clinging onto every opportunity they can to go and work. You basically stumbled and
fell on my lap.
NASA.
Yeah.
And that's amazing that it wasn't really your calling, but you did discover, obviously, that NASA was a good fit for you, because no one's going to stick around for 42 years if they didn't. So one thing that I learned about you, which I thought was quite amazing, is that as the business person at NASA, you were involved in buying equipment and things for NASA, including spacesuits and space shuttles.
Yes. Yes.
Where do you go? Do you look in a catalog and go, I'm looking for a rocket? Oh, that's a good one. We're going to get one of the, how does that all work?
No, in fact, actually, that was the fun part, right? And boy, yeah, you nailed it. So I started in 1975. And so that was 6 years before the first shuttle flight. But they had already started working on this shuttle program and awarded contracts and were designing the rocket. And so when I started working, the first couple of years, they moved those of us that were hired around to different parts of the agency just to kind of get a feel for everything that was going on. So I think it was a couple of 1977 or 78 when they assigned me to what was called the Extravehicular Mobility Unit, EMU, which was a fancy name for a spacesuit. They were designing the new ones for the upcoming space shuttle program. And so yeah, no, certainly there was no catalog to go buy them from. And so what we would do is we would send out a solicitation to industry and say, hey, U.S. aerospace companies and any other company that was eligible, we need spacesuits for the space shuttle program. If you think you can design and manufacture and build and deliver these spacesuits, send us a proposal and we will pick the best one. And there you go. Yeah. And award a contract to the company that has the best overall proposal. And so I was, certainly wasn't me by myself. I was in an office. There were about, 3 or 4 of us working on this contract to design, deliver the EMUs. And so we did that for a couple of years. So my very first government trip was to the Hamilton Standard, the company that won the contract, in Windsor Locks, Connecticut. Never forget that trip. I hadn't even flown on an airplane much at that point.
You've been on a helicopter, so now what's an airplane?
You know what? Now that you mention it, I think my helicopter flight was before my first airplane flight, actually. Wow. But so then after a couple of years with the EMU, they moved me over to start literally buying the space shuttle orbiter vehicles. Here, let me grab from my.
Ooh, and am I taking it that you've got some really, really awesome little toys and keepsakes over the years?
Yeah. This is one of my favorites. Apollo module with the lunar module. Mm-hmm. But so I was assigned again, and again, it wasn't me by myself. There was an office of about 6 or 8 of us that were working on this multi-billion-dollar contract with Rockwell to build the space shuttle orbiter vehicles. And so I was literally buying these. And
you actually buying these little airplane, right? the rocket airplane part of the actual shuttle
for about $2 billion each. And so there was a different contract for the main engines, another contract for the solid rocket boosters, and another contract for the external tank. But I was buying this. And in fact, it's and one interesting story to me is if any of you, especially the kids who I can tell were not even young enough to get to see a live space shuttle launch because we stopped flying them in 2011, but 135 launches, the last 133 had an orange external tank.
Correct.
And this is, so this is an early model because it's white. And that's because back in the early days, it's super cooled liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen in this external tank. And so they thought they needed to protect it from the ultraviolet rays of the sun. So they painted it white. And after the first two launches, they realized that they didn't need to do that after all. So they stopped painting it, and it saved 600 pounds of paint but by not painting it white and just leaving it its natural orange color. But
$2 billion is a lot of money back in those days.
Oh yeah,
that was a lot of money. So when you sit down and you talk about a spacesuit, what you call the EMU, I mean, it's not like you've got many examples to choose from. You've got people who've never ever designed one before, but coming up with, no, we can definitely design it. You have to know that the thing that you are buying is good value for money.
Yeah.
So that means you have to learn about the spacesuit before you're going to spend money on it.
Oh yeah, we would get the proposals we would get from the companies like Hamilton Standard that won that contract to build the EMUs were hundreds of pages, literally, hundreds of pages with, drawings and pictures and, this is the material we're going to use. This is how we're going to put it together. This is how many layers. And, so you have to, no, that's a good point. So in other words, it's not the kind of thing that happened in a week or a month. These proposals, receipt, evaluation, and discussions would take a year sometimes. Yeah, in fact,
But I mean, you had budgets, so you had to plan at least. I mean, when I spoke to Charlie Bolden, who was the previous administrator, two administrators ago, he said to me that whenever you do things, you have like a 5-year planning phase. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you knew about the shuttle 5 years before this actual thing, the bid was put in and that sort of thing happened. So, I mean, how do you know that the company that's going to win the contract is going to be able to deliver something that has never been delivered before?
Well, yeah, that's sometimes harder than it seems. And so a lot of times you have, I guess, kind of interim steps or milestones. And so it's not just here's the contract and here's the money, we'll see you again when it's done. There's a constant interaction along the way and testing, say, hey, is this actually going to do what you said it's going to do? And is this really going to work? And so for example, when I was buying the Space Shuttle orbiter vehicles, I from Houston, I flew out to Downey, California. It's part of Los Angeles, about once a month, to meet with Rockwell people to talk about, okay, how's it going here? Are things going well? What do we need to redesign, or what's working, what's not working, and have you tested this yet? And so it's very much incremental steps for something. Certainly a space shuttle orbiter vehicle. In fact, we had a hard time keeping up with not only the Rockwell engineers, but also the NASA engineers as the space shuttle orbiters were being built. It's like, hey, we should change this, or we should upgrade this, or we should redesign this. And it's like, just constant.
And that comes to the accounting department, and you're like, whoa, we put money aside, and now it sits on my shoulders, because if it doesn't work out, or if we can't afford a certain part, then the whole thing might not work. I mean, there's a lot of pressure.
Oh yeah, well, and so of course, the things that are being designed that have never been built before always end up taking longer than planned, and they usually end up costing more than planned. But that reminds me of a funny story, talking about taking longer than planned, and I have a copy, it's not handy, of this was, again, 1972 was when the Space Shuttle program was authorized, and they started awarding contracts and thinking about what kind of design and that kind of thing. And so this is 1979. I'm working on starting to buy the design, development, and engineering and testing of them. And so in 1980, when we thought we might be flying, even 1979 or 1980, and so now it's 1981, and we think we're getting close to that first flight. And so it was, I think February or March, and we're thinking the plan is to have the first flight in March of 1981. And someone made a calendar, a piece of paper, a calendar, and put it in. I walked into the building one morning and got on the elevator, and it's taped to the wall of the elevator, and the calendar was January, February, March, 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 March. And it said, we will launch in March.
That is, but I mean, that must have been one of the biggest moments in space history when that first shuttle launched.
Well, yeah, and of course, as you may know, it didn't launch in March. It launched on April 12th for the first time. But yeah, oh my gosh, yeah. And I for comparison, I only got to watch the Apollo launches on television. I actually got to see a space shuttle launch in person. And boy, that's just, I mean, seeing any rocket launch is amazing, but a space shuttle launch, and the closest you can get is about 3 miles. And so the way the physics work with the light and sound and such is from 3 miles away, you see it first, and then it takes a little while for the sound waves to travel, and then you hear it, and then you actually feel it.
I thought you were going to say that rumble.
Yeah, there's enormous. There's a YouTube video of someone at a shuttle launch about 3 miles away, with cars parked, and the car alarms start going off because the ground is shaking. Yeah, so that's just an incredible. I hope everyone watching who hasn't got to see a rocket launch gets to see one live and in person someday. It's really
with Elon Musk. You never know. I mean, they're going to be one every week. So I think, and maybe even in our country one day. Who knows? So now I see we've got some questions coming in. Yeah. A quick question. We'll go to Margaret first. So let me see if I can find Margaret. Margaret, do you want to ask your question quickly? I've just unmuted you. We'll see if Margaret can squeeze in her question. She looks like she's frozen there for a bit. Let's just see. She has frozen, so I'll ask a question for her, and then we're going to go to Holland Middle School. Margaret wanted to know, did you ever meet Katherine Johnson from the Johnson Center?
Well, no. Well, so I did not. I was not lucky enough to do. I would have loved to have met her, but the Johnson Space Center is actually named after Lyndon B. Johnson.
Lyndon Johnson, correct.
Not
but I thought
right.
they named something after her recently. Something in NASA, they named something after her.
Yes. I think it was a center in West Virginia. But yes, you're right. They did name a NASA building or facility after. So no, I didn't get to meet her. She was a little earlier than the days when I became entrenched, if you will, in NASA and was not in just my little corner there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then we have students from Holland Middle School. Let's see what they have to ask. Hello, we can hear you. Go for it.
What school do you? My name is Ava, and I was wondering what school you have to go to get into NASA.
Oh, there's no real answer for that. You can go to just about any school. Well, and of course, again, it depends to some degree on what you want to do at NASA. But even then, whether you want to work for NASA, or you don't even have to work for NASA to be involved in what they're doing. NASA has hundreds, thousands of contractors, aerospace companies that support NASA. But anyway, back to your question, whether you want to be an engineer, a scientist, or a doctor, or even an astronaut, there's no magic preferred degree or certainly school that is guaranteed to get you that job. The thing, and I've been asked this myself and heard it asked so many times, is how, and your question wasn't specifically about astronauts, it was just NASA in general, but they ask, how do I, or what do you suggest I do, or what school should I go to, or what subject should I take to be an astronaut? And you can't answer that. The answer is you have to pick a subject or a school that you're interested in and that you're going to do well at and that you want to learn more about, because those are the people who get to work at NASA and get picked as astronauts. It's people who have done well in school, learned a lot, are successful in what they're doing. And so, the worst thing you could do is think, hey, if I go to that school and I study, aerospace engineering, I'll get to work for NASA. And if it's not something you enjoy, because then you're kind of stuck unless you want to go back again, with having a career there. No, you just need to do what is I hate to say what you're passionate about. Some people say that, but what you're interested in and what you enjoy doing and what you think you want to learn more about.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you say that, because I've spoken to Daniel. I don't know if you've met Daniel, from the graphic designer who worked at NASA. And he's not a STEM person at all, but he got into NASA designing all their fabulous posters and marketing purely through his artistic skill. So, and I know astronauts, I know quite a few astronauts. We've even had a few out here in South Africa. Some of them, they really fought hard to get in, and some of them were turned down 5 or 6 times, but they just didn't take no for an answer. So
even more than
it depends on how hungry you are.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Clay Anderson was turned down 15 times, I think.
There we go. There's an example of perseverance, if ever. So
it's not quite as bad as it sounds, because at one point he had actually already gotten a job at NASA. So he had a career and he was working for NASA. He just insisted on that he wanted to be an astronaut, though. And so even though he was already working for NASA, he kept applying and applying and applying 15 times, I think, before he was finally selected.
Absolutely. So now, Mr. McNulty, you've got another question over there, and don't worry, Tanya will get to you next.
Hi, I'm Rachel, and I wanted to know if what they did with the extra 600 pounds of white paint.
Oh, well, that's a great question. And so it's very expensive to launch things into space, whatever it is, people, food, water, experiments. And so what that did, not having to put that 600 pounds of paint on the external tank, allowed them to have an additional 600 pounds of cargo, if you will, whether, again, it was food or water or oxygen or experiments. And so, yeah, that was actually very important, that 600 pounds. Yeah.
So what did you do with the paint? Did you paint a building with it?
I think they just didn't buy it.
They just didn't buy it. Sure. And I see that we have a question from Miss Fletcher's group. Let's have a go. There we go.
Hi, Natalie. Hi, I'm Natalie. How long can a person live in space?
Oh, that's another good question. You really don't know the answer to that. And I'm not sure exactly, but about a year or a little over.
Now, the new record is coming up now. I think that it's going to be just over a year. Yeah. But they could live longer. But if you are financing it as the person who works in the accounting department, I mean, there's a lot of cost involved in keeping someone in space for a while.
Well, yeah, and there are other factors like
radiation and bone density.
Well, oh yes, no, absolutely, and even things like in fact, I was just reading an article about how what astronauts they would keep journals and write down good things and bad things. And just for example, when you're up in space and you're away from your home and family and just driving down the road to get any food you want and all of those other comforts of home, for example, food becomes even more important. And so it's funny how just little things that wouldn't really upset a person on Earth if they had all those other comforts around them can make them very upset if someone took their dessert, or and so anyway, the whole point of that is it's the psychological element of being in space for a long period of time, and again, away from your family and home and all of those other comforts, not to mention the things like you talked about is the radiation and that's a problem too, especially one day when we go to Mars, if you're spending 6 months. In fact, that's a problem that they haven't solved yet, is how to protect from a long period of radiation in space travel.
Sure. I see we have Amanda in Brazil. There we go. I've unmuted you.
Hello. Actually, we have a student, Camila, but she's shy, but she has 2 questions.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is, how was your first day working at NASA?
Well, I don't remember a lot of it, but I just remember it was awesome. In fact, I tell people that I felt very lucky to be one of those few people who every morning when I woke up, I looked forward to going to work, because the people working that I got to work with at NASA were amazing. And they're not all geniuses. Certainly, I'm a good example of that. But they're just smart and dedicated and brave, and want to accomplish the mission, whatever it takes. They're not looking out for themselves. They're just doing it, like I said, anything, whether it's helping another person that might help that person get promoted before you. That doesn't matter. They just want to successfully complete the mission, and they will do whatever it takes to do that. And we feel like we're doing something that's important to the world, and so that's a great feeling too. And boy, even after 42 years, I remember my last few days or weeks, I thought, I'll kind of ease out and kind of slow down. Oh no, it was interesting, exciting, challenging up to the very last day. So anyway, I'm sure again, I started feeling that very first day I started there.
But if I can just point out, Herb might be downplaying this, but I think that he might have left physically, but his mind is still there. And I know this because whenever they have any of these massive anniversaries, Apollo anniversary, he gets invites to everything. Yeah. So they must like him still, because if he's getting invites to all the big dues, do you get invited to any of the SpaceX events?
No, not SpaceX. But
I'm just saying, because I thought maybe there might be some crossover. They might say, well, we'll invite some of the very important people from NASA as well, just to kind of play a role. No connection there?
No, not to space. Well, no, but I did. I was involved with SpaceX from the NASA side back in 2006. This was the first time, the Space Shuttle was still flying for another 5 years, but we realized that we were going to have to stop flying the shuttle someday, and we wanted, rather than paying once it stopped flying, rather than paying the Russians $75 million for a seat on one of their Soyuz capsules to take our astronauts to the space station, we thought, hey, it would be a good idea to help U.S. commercial companies like SpaceX, although they had, were very in their early days then, develop their own rockets and spaceships, and they can be like taxis for us. We'll just buy a ride. We won't NASA won't build and take care of and design and develop the rockets. We'll just, when we need to fly an astronaut to space, we'll just buy a ride from one of these companies. So we did another one of those activities where we issued a solicitation to US industry and basically said, hey, if you're interested in develop your own capability to fly astronauts into space, you can design the spaceship however you want. You can design the rocket however you want. All we care about is safely getting our person from Earth to the space station, and we know you all have great ideas. So let us know what you're thinking. And so we got, I don't know, 15 or 20 proposals in, and I was part of the group that got to evaluate those proposals and select the ones to choose to give about $250 million to each. And so SpaceX was one of them. SpaceX and a company called Rocket Plane Kistler. And so I still have I saved it, the sheet of paper that Elon Musk signed, the agreement that, okay, here's the way we're going to design and develop and build our rocket. And so again, that was 2006. That was 16 years ago now. And it took a little longer to get, they certainly started delivering cargo to the space station years ago. And now it's even been a couple of years, I think, since they started delivering astronauts. But yeah, so I was involved with Elon Musk 16 years ago, back in the very early days of SpaceX. But yeah.
Awesome. And now, Amanda, you have another question?
Yeah, Camila has another question. The second is, which day was the most important or special for you in this job?
There must have been a highlight. I mean, you've obviously met people like Neil Armstrong and that sort of thing, but there might have been one special day that stood out for you.
Wow, that's a really good question. I don't know that I've ever thought about that. People have asked me, what my favorite, activity or experience was, but my favorite day. Wow, it might be. I've got two answers. So one might actually be that very first day that first space shuttle launched. I remember that very well, April 12th, 1981. But my second answer, because this is more related, it's not so much a day, but in 1987, I was working I'd been sent to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida to work on a special assignment. It was the early days of the space station, and we needed some engineering support to support the space station program office. And so we did one of those competitions to aerospace companies, and they sent proposals in and we evaluated them. And again, this took almost a year. And so we picked Grumman. It was the company who built the lunar modules for the Apollo program. And so what makes this special was it turned out the day we picked them, they announced that they, as their new president of Grumman Space Station Program Support Division to lead this effort that we had just contracted for, was Fred Hayes, the Apollo 13 astronaut. So now all of a sudden I realized that I'm going to be negotiating this 10-year, almost $1 billion contract to support the space station program with Fred Hayes, one of the Apollo 13 astronauts. And so, that whole couple of years then that working with him and it was in his office once a week for the management status meetings. And so we became good friends and are still friends today. Actually, he lives just a few minutes away from me. We both moved back to Houston. But yeah, that's after having covered the Apollo 13 mission as a teenager, and then fast forward 18 years and getting to work with him, and now fast forward another 18, 20 years and him being a friend, that's just one of the most exciting parts of my whole career, again, because he's one of my heroes.
I can imagine, and as I said, you didn't start off as a STEM person. So it wasn't like you were a space groupie, and whenever you saw the astronauts, you would chase after them and say, "Can I please get your autograph?" I mean, you can imagine that you get to work with Fred Hayes. But for those of you who don't know, if you ever get a chance to watch Apollo 13, Fred Hayes was one of there were 3 astronauts on the Apollo 13 that was supposed to fly to the moon. But something happened along the way, and they actually couldn't get to the moon, but they weren't sure if they were going to get back to Earth alive because they were running out of oxygen. And it became one of the tensest, most, significant space catastrophe that could have happened in the history of space travel. And to cut a long story short, the 3 of them actually made it back alive. In fact, it was Jim Lovell's birthday just yesterday, if I recall correctly, 96 years old.
Yeah, yes, they call it NASA's most successful failure.
But if you ever watch the movie and you see what they were doing to try and solve the problem while the astronauts were up in space, they were trying to make mock-ups of what the space rocket had inside. And they said, try this to try and bypass the oxygen. And it was real problem solving at its finest. And they actually got it down. And that was purely through incredible hard work and teamwork. And as far as I'm concerned, it's probably one of the most significant displays of incredible perseverance and hard work and excellence that came from NASA during its time there. But on a more serious note, launching rockets has got a slight drawback in that not every single mission is going to be successful. Mm-hmm. And while you were there involving the shuttle, we had 2 very well-known and well documented accidents where unfortunately we lost the astronauts that were on those flights. Were you involved in any of those flights? Did you get to know any of the astronauts?
Oh, yes. Well, so in fact, even back up again to my early days growing up in Houston. So Apollo 1, there was a fire on the launch pad, and Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee were all killed in the fire. And I was friends with Gus Grissom's 2 sons. We're still friends today. So even that, in January 1967 was an event that kind of shook me up. And but what you're talking about is the Challenger accident in January 1986. I was actually working at NASA headquarters. I had been sent up there on a special 1-year assignment, and this was a Tuesday, and it was going to be my last week there. And so they had a going away party planned for me for that Friday. And on Tuesday, the Challenger exploded as it launched, and it was the worst work day of my career. It was, that was the first time as a professional NASA employee that we had lost astronauts, and no one knew what to do or what to say. We were all walking around. This was in the morning, we were just starting the day, and walking around like zombies. It was a horrible day. And so Judy Resnick was one of the Challenger astronauts, and I had
and a teacher.
Well, Kristen McAuliffe was the teacher.
Oh, no, sorry, I'm talking nonsense.
Yeah.
Judy, okay.
But so Judy Resnick was, and so I'm a young single guy, and she was just beautiful young woman who I had a crush on, and so I went to exercise classes with her every Saturday morning. This was the early '80s, a couple of years before the launch. We didn't live that far from each other, and so. Again, Saturday mornings, we just happened to meet by accident. It wasn't like she and I were good friends or anything, but we went to exercise classes together for probably a few months or a year or so off and on. And so I certainly knew her fairly well. And then in 2003, I was working in the shuttle program when Columbia broke apart as it was re-entering the atmosphere. And so I at least casually knew some of those astronauts. I wasn't, of all the astronauts I've known and become friends with the workers. I didn't really work with that many of that group of 7. But for example, one of them, I don't even remember which one it was now. Their son was, my wife was a school teacher, a librarian, and her son was one of his students, one of her students. And so, certainly that, I would hear about how difficult that was when she's used to interfacing with the mother, and now the mother's gone, and it's the father trying to step in, as part of the school.
Now, when those incidents happen, does that change your focus? So now we're buying a new space shuttle, and we're going to be launching it after a major accident like that. Do we change the way we buy things? Do we spend money on different things? Are we spending too little, or are we spending too much? Should we even buy another space shuttle? Are they too much of a risk? I mean, what goes through your mind when a situation like that takes place?
Well, so I think what goes through, certainly there's this feeling of for a lot of, I think most people is, wow, what could I have done different, if anything, to have avoided that? And so for most people, really the answer is nothing, I think. But it's kind of a I've heard it characterized as a kind of a culture thing, where it's certainly not one person, but you tend to, and so the Apollo 1 fire was 1967, and so it was what 19 years later before the Challenger accident, and then 17 years later before the Columbia accident. And so over time, as you're continuing to do difficult things and you're doing them, accomplishing them successfully, you kind of take things for granted and think, oh, well, kind of like the public, oh, well, that's not so hard. They've done that many times. I'm not even going to watch because I know that it's going to work fine. And you forget about how dangerous it is, what they're doing, and you take things for granted. Oh, well, we've had some problems with some of the foam coming off the external tank and hitting the shuttle, but nothing terrible has ever happened. Well, if that foam hits just the right spot, something terrible is going to happen. And so that's really kind of what happened with Columbia. They, looking backwards after it happened, and I did get to, because I was involved in the Space Shuttle program, I got to work with what they call the CAIB, CAIB, Columbia Accident Investigation Board. Looking back and think, well, wait a minute, if we had really paid closer attention to all of those pieces of foam shedding off the external tank and hitting the shuttle, we might have realized that we need to stop and fix that, because if it hits just the right spot, it's going to be a really bad day. And so, that's, and so, going forward though, I have to say, and people ask me, what inspired you? I think seeing after an accident like that, where the astronauts lose 7 of their close friends and co-workers, and you start working towards returning to flight, and those astronauts are almost fighting each other to get to be the next one to go back. It's not like, oh, on second thought, I'm not sure I want to fly on one of those or not. It's just the opposite. It's, they're so brave and selfless, that and realize that what they're doing is good for humanity and the world and the country, and they're willing to risk their life. And I'll go.
Wow.
And so that that's what inspires me.
Awesome. Now I see, Gustavo, you've got a question.
Yeah, I've got a question. Since I'm Brazilian, I would like to know if you have met any other Brazilians working at NASA, and if is it common or usual to see Brazilians there?
I think the answer is no. At least not that I can recall. There are, I have a lot of social media connections, and there are a couple of people who live in Brazil, but they're not associated with NASA or the space industry. So I don't.
But NASA's huge. I mean, it's very possible that some of them are working,
Oh,
with robotics, maybe helping to build the Mars rover. I mean, I know of one South African, Willie, who worked up at NASA, and he was an incredibly popular scientist there, and he would come down to South Africa quite frequently, and he passed away about 6 months ago. But at the end of the day, you do get foreigners who are there, and it's highly probable that there are people from Brazil there, and if they are not dancing and doing the samba inside Johnson Laboratory, they are building something. I'm sure that there are definitely Brazilians, because there are brilliant people all over the world. Yes. And Brazil is no exception to the rule. I'm sure you've got some brilliant people there that are working at NASA.
That's a great point. Like you said, there are about at any given time about 15,000 NASA employees throughout the country, and so I know a lot of them, but I don't know anywhere near anywhere.
But they don't always have to be at NASA, though. A lot of organizations work with NASA, and they might be based. So, for example, in South Africa, they might be developing components for a satellite, and then those are then moved on to NASA, and NASA then integrates them in a satellite. So you might find that there is a growing space industry in Brazil where they do provide certain services to NASA, but not necessarily work at NASA, if that makes sense.
Yes. In fact, that's true. There are about...
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say there are about 5 times as many contractor people, working for aerospace companies supporting NASA as there are NASA employees. Yeah.
So, and we're talking big money here. I mean, this is the kind of money, it's like monopoly money when they go, yeah, right. I mean, do you still have a slip for the Space Shuttle, $2 billion? Do you have the little slip? Do you claim that as a business expense? I mean, can you, do you get Voyager, air miles for spending $2 billion on a rocket? I mean, can you imagine using NASA's credit card and you get air miles for buying a $2 billion shuttle? I mean, that wouldn't be too bad. I'm sure you could fly for the rest of your life that way. Now, Margaret wanted to know, and this is something you could probably take a stab at, but the process of actually launching a space shuttle, it's not just a case of taking a rocket, putting it onto the launch pad, and then just switch the button on and it flies away. I mean, there's a lot that goes in, and I'm sure from a financial point of view and business planning, you need to make sure that you've got all the things that are there to make it happen. So from your perspective, I mean, do you know anything about the launching of a shuttle that maybe you can let us know about?
Well, yeah, so possibly a couple of things that come to mind, and so again, I'm not an engineer, but one interesting part of the process is, I've always thought was interesting, certainly for the space shuttle, is how there's a computer on board that's set up to help with this to start things at just the right time, but there are three main engines on a space shuttle, and at about T-7 seconds, so 7 seconds before it launches, those main engines start up. There's a computer that starts them, and they start what they call gimbaling around just to kind of test themselves out for that 7 seconds before the launch. And the computer is determining, okay, if everything's all right with those 3 main engines, and sometimes it's not. And so for example, there were, I think, 5 flights of those 135 where those main engines actually lit up and started, but they're not strong enough to lift the shuttle off the launch pad because it's bolted down. And at one time it got down to, I think, 1 second before launch. And if you can imagine sitting up in that capsule, and you're sitting on your back for a few hours, and they're 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the main engine start, and then they stop. because that computer decided, oh, no, there's something not right. And sometimes it's just a sensor, but 5 times those main engines lit up and got down to close to, 1 or 2 seconds and just stopped. And so another part of that is that, again, even though those main engines have started, it takes those solid rocket boosters to light up at 0. And all of a sudden, then you're going somewhere in a hurry. and so again, at about a minute and a half, the solid rocket boosters have finished, and they separate, or they would have separated from the shuttle and fell into the ocean. And then the external tank continued supplying fuel to those main engines for another couple of minutes until they got into space. And so that whole process was always very interesting to me. Again, especially considering how those astronauts would get within a second or two of launching and thinking they're going to launch, and then the engines just stopping. That had to be kind of scary too, because then one of the first things they had to do was adjust the computer and tell the computer we're not going anywhere, because if they hadn't, at about a minute and a half into the sequence, these solid rocket boosters would have separated from the shuttle on the launch pad, and that would have been a really bad day.
Sure. So you can imagine, there's a lot of technical stuff that goes in it. That's why they have such a large team of people at every launch. But now you've been through the Apollo missions, you've been through the shuttle missions, and now you've seen someone like SpaceX launching a rocket, and then it lands vertically back on the launch pad. What was your first reaction when you saw that?
I think I said a word that I probably couldn't repeat later, but it was just, it was just like mind blowing. I had never, as much as I had been involved and worked with NASA, it never occurred to me that you could launch a rocket and then land it back down in a specific spot,
on a boat moving.
Yes, that's just incredible to me. So yeah, just like anybody else, regardless of, like you said, I've seen the Gemini Apollo shuttle, but landing a rocket back on Earth after it's been to space just still blows my mind every day, and how accurately they do that.
So here comes a tough question. Right now, everyone's getting a chance to fly to space, whether it be on Blue Origin, SpaceX, or on Virgin Galactic.
Yeah.
Would you go if you were given the chance?
I think I would. I'm 70 years old.
21 plus GST. Don't worry about it.
But there are guys, at least a couple of people older than me that have, flown to space. So yeah, the answer is yes. I think I would. Yeah.
One quick question. Michaela wanted to know, how much does it cost to fuel a rocket? Because we know that a rocket doesn't actually use a couple of gallons of fuel. According to my good friend Don Thomas, they were pouring out a swimming pool's worth of fuel every minute or something like that. So what does it cost to fuel a rocket launch?
Oh, I have no idea.
You guys are paying for it.
Yeah, I never was involved in acquiring the fuel. Now I do know, and maybe this would, kind of give you an idea, that it cost about, I want to say about $500 million to launch a space shuttle. Forgetting the cost for designing and developing and building.
So that's just on the day it costs $500 million.
And so there's a lot more involved, and that includes people and the spacesuits. But I guess I would say the fuel must have been at least tens of millions of dollars. And like you said, that's a lot of fuel. And I'm sure super cooled liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen is not something you can just go down to Walmart and pick up in a canister either. So I had tens of millions of dollars probably.
Okay. And Margaret wants to know, she said that Zelie over there would like to go to Mars. Do you think it's going to happen in your lifetime?
Well, that depends on how long I think I'm going to live, right?
You'll live at least another 50 years, but I mean, but do you think it's going to happen in the next decade or so?
Well, no, I don't think it's going to happen in the next decade. Maybe 15 or 20 years. And the reason I say that is, just for example, like you said, we haven't even solved the problems yet, like the radiation protection, and we still haven't solved problems of how you have enough food for some number of people for 6 months or whatever. And people say, well, how long does it take to get to Mars? Well, the answer is it depends. It depends on how the planets are aligned when you leave. The shortest is about 6 months, I think, and so there's still significant technical issues that we don't have answers for yet. And the reason I say 15 or 20 years is going back to my mentions earlier of SpaceX, and it was 2006 when we first gave SpaceX $250 million and said, go design and build your Dragon and your rockets. That was 16 years ago. And so, as much progress, innovation as they might have experienced over 16 years, that's still, all they've done is launch from, the Earth to the space station. I mean, not that that's easy, but there's a whole nother story of sending people to Mars. And if it's been 16 years since they started with their current setup, that seems like a long time, but it's really not. I mean, I think it's going to go by like that if you're thinking about how soon can we get to Mars.
Sure. All right. Now, I have noticed that, I mean, I don't know where the time flies because we still got at least another 15 hours worth of conversation to go. What I do want to know is we've got a lot of young people and you are very vested in working with organizations involving young people. Yes. To promote science, technology, engineering, maths, robotics, and coding and stuff. What message do you have for the young students that are interested in STEM?
Yes. So my message would be, if you're interested, especially for young girls, because they tend to get told, oh, that's not for you. That's engineering is for guys and men, and you need to go do something else, which I absolutely think is horrible. I think I've got to work around some of the smartest, most brilliant, technically, capable women in the world at NASA. And so first of all, I would say, don't let anyone discourage you from studying physics or math or astronomy or whatever it is, just because they think, whether it's a teacher or a friend or professor or whatever. I've heard many stories. Ellen Ochoa, who became the director of the Johnson Space Center, I remember her telling a story about how she wanted to take engineering in college, and the professor she talked to said, well, I'm not really sure that you would like that, and you might think about something else. And so she went to talk to a physics professor, and he was just the opposite. He said, oh yeah, physics is great, I think you'll do wonderful. And so she did that. She did well enough that she became selected as an astronaut, and then she did so well that she was selected as the director of the Johnson Space Center. So anyway, all of that to say, don't let anyone tell you that you can't do what you want to do. And one other thing I like to talk about is, especially because it's a kind of a NASA famous quote, is talking about Apollo 13 for the movie, Gene Kranz, the flight director, is attributed with saying failure is not an option. He never actually said that. It was a quote that was created just for the movie script, but now he's kind of taken it on. And in fact, his book is titled Failure is Not an Option. And I guess if you're trying to save the lives of 3 astronauts that are stuck in space, you could say failure is not an option. But otherwise, failure is not just an option, it's a requirement. I mean, you heard that if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. So don't be afraid to do something that you might not be good at just at first. Give yourself an opportunity to learn and maybe make a few mistakes and fail a few times if there's something that you have a desire to do.
I think that is a wonderful way to end off, a very important message, especially for the young people there. We've got Ms. Bresnick's group over there. Hello. Just remember that making mistakes is part of the process. This is how you actually do succeed. Not all of the astronauts were accepted first time round. And as we've heard, there was one astronaut who was turned down 14 or 15 times before he actually got selected to be an astronaut. So you know what? It's okay if you don't succeed the first time. You just don't give up. You keep trying hard, because if that's what your goal is, that's what you need to head to. And on that note, Herb, I'd like to say thank you so much for your time and your energy. It really, really is inspiring to hear from someone who's been involved in the industry for so long. And of course, Margaret wanted to know, are there any women in space? Well, as Herb mentioned, he's worked with many wonderful women in space. And there's also this young lady called Margaret. She's going to be an astronaut. And when she goes up for her first launch, don't worry, Margie, we're going to be there. We're going to be standing there cheering you on. Go, Margie, go. Go. You never know. You could be that next astronaut that actually flies to Mars. It's very possible. And we would be excited if you were the one that was selected. And I do want to say that, of course, for those of you that are interested in space, science, technology, engineering, and maths, as Herb said, just keep following what interests you, because you never, and even language, don't worry, from Brazil, you might be a language school, but you never know. There is a lot of language involved in space as well. And especially if you're going to be an astronaut, working with astronauts from different countries, communication is very important. So I do want to say that you should hold on to those dreams, grab them with both hands. And if you do fail and it doesn't work out, you get up and you carry on, because you never know where life is going to lead you. And on that note, we're going to say thank you so much to Herb, and for all of you that have joined us live on YouTube, and for those of you on Facebook, and of course, for those of you that are live in the Zoom call as well, we thank you very much. And I'm going to allow you to unmute yourselves. And if you want to say goodbye, you can do so. So thank you so much. And thank you, Herb. That was really fantastic.
Thank you.